The year is 1660. 4-year-old Charles XI ascends to the throne of the Swedish Empire. When he comes of age, he will, much like his predecessors, be tasked with leading Sweden, which had recently reached its territorial apex, through the most expansive and ambitious period in the history of the kingdom. Sweden in the 17th century sought not only to gain an upper hand against its rivals, namely Russia, Poland, and Denmark-Norway, but to become a major European power in its own right. Throughout the century, Sweden had earned substantial prestige during the 30 Years' War under the valiant Gustavus Adolphus, and even went so far as to attempt to colonize North America, establishing short-lived colonies in modern-day New England. As Sweden endeavored to succeed in its daring ambitions, many ideas were presented to the king and taken into consideration. One such idea was, perhaps, moose cavalry. Ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome to Fire of Learning. Moose cavalry is exactly what it sounds like. Instead of mounting soldiers on horseback, the idea is to mount them atop moose, or what Europeans would call a Eurasian elk, which is different from what Americans would call elk. It's confusing, but for now don't worry about it too much. Now, I won't hold you in suspense. The Swedish never actually ended up adopting this tactic, but the notion is so bizarre, we have to wonder, why did this idea come up at all? How far did it go? And did anyone else adopt moose cavalry? Sweden, as you may know, is one of Europe's northernmost and coldest countries. Moose thrive in this environment, and indeed Scandinavia marks the westernmost extent of the moose range in Eurasia. As a former resident of Alaska, I can tell you personally that moose are quite large and powerful beasts which are dangerous when provoked. The notion of facing a moose in battle would likely have been quite intimidating to most soldiers. However, moose are docile enough to interact with humans under the right conditions and can be tamed. Though not as fast as horses, they are able to reach speeds of up to 35 miles or 56 kilometers an hour, and can travel great distances within a day, perhaps even further than horses in the climates to which they are accustomed. There was also a belief that moose would frighten horses in battle, much like camels and elephants do, and that, were a regiment of horse cavalry thrown up against one of moose, the former would find great difficulty in keeping the animals calm. As you can see, there was some potential to these animals. However, given the long shared history between humans and moose, why was it only then, in the 17th century, that this idea came about? Some legends state that moose domestication was specifically outlawed in the Middle Ages, because there was a concern that moose were too fast and would allow criminals to get away from authorities. Historian Dick Harrison points out, however, that there is no evidence for this claim. Rather, it appears that any attempts at domestication in the past never got too far because the moose was simply quite difficult to work with compared to the horse. As mentioned, it's not difficult necessarily to tame moose and make them comfortable around humans per se. There is, for example, a moose farm in Russia called the Kostroma Moose Farm, which has successfully domesticated them for things such as seasonal milk, which is apparently useful at treating various gastrointestinal disorders. However, they are much more limited than horses and require specific care. Firstly, they have a much more specific diet, which is costly to provide, preferring to browse on specific vegetation in the forest over being fed like horses. They are unfit to be housed in pens for this reason, among others. Furthermore, they are less social than horses, have a worse tolerance for disease spread to them by humans and other livestock, and have a worse tolerance for heat, thus restricting their range and use during the summer months especially. Last but not least, they do not much enjoy being ridden by humans and are much more difficult to break. Given their power and temperament, trying to do so could go wrong very easily. It is possible to domesticate them for travel, to haul a cart, or even to be mounted. However, domestication for battle is a whole other issue. As mentioned, the moose can be a considerable threat when provoked, but will often prefer to avoid combat and flee most dangerous situations. It's possible, though unconfirmed, that moose would scare away horses, but quite likely that they themselves would have been frightened by large armies and musket and cannon fire. They also have worse vision than horses and could make easier targets on a battlefield, although their thick hide and dense bones make them more difficult to bring down. Exactly what results of 17th century experimentation with moose cavalry produced, and indeed the extent of the experimentation itself, appears lost to history. If there was thorough experimentation with the idea by the Swedish military, it does not appear to have been recorded. Likewise, King Charles XI's thoughts on the subject don't seem to have been recorded either, thus drawing certain accounts into question and leading some researchers, like Suna Birkloff and the aforementioned Dick Harrison, to suspect that most claims of moose domestication are mostly just fable, at least on a wide scale, as there are documented individual cases of people using moose for transportation, but nothing major and never in battle. It appears more proposals for making a use out of moose were made, however. Some Swedes may have sought to use moose for their postal system, but this idea never materialized either, again at least to a major degree, possibly due to the overhunting of the animal alongside the aforementioned reasons. It also appears that the idea may have made its way to Russia, though the evidence of supposed attempts at domesticating moose there is even less substantial. Claims that the Mansi people of Siberia rode them into battle, and that the Empress Catherine the Great banned them from being ridden out of a fear that they would be used by rebels, appears to be little more than legend. There are claims that the Soviets attempted to domesticate moose, namely for the Winter War with Finland, but most of this seems to originate with a prank article written by a Russian news outlet. This article, focusing on the Soviet dream of moose armies, claims that moose were trained to differentiate the Russian language from the Finnish one from over a kilometer away, and had machine guns mounted on their antlers. A number of people, including a Russian museum, unfortunately, but hilariously, took the article seriously. While the moose would have doubtlessly made a powerful, intimidating, and in many circumstances useful steed, anyone who has ever tried to domesticate the beast for this purpose seems to have found that they were too difficult and limited to work with. That we know of. Sweden has been rather quiet, militarily speaking, ever since the Napoleonic Wars, so it's difficult to say what they might have been up to since then. Anyway, due to the lack of evidence on the subject, we'll conclude by saying that, though there was clearly some consideration given to the idea in various places throughout history, which led to occasional, isolated incidents of experimentation, there were probably never any serious major efforts to get moose on the battlefield. Charles XI was doubtlessly interested in improving his military, and is remembered in part for doing so, but this doesn't appear to have included la Cavalry. I hope you enjoyed this video. If so, I invite you to come check out the rest of Fire of Learning and to subscribe to see more videos like this in the future. To help with the cost of producing these videos, a donation on Patreon would be a big help. A special thanks to our current Patreon supporters listed here. We are also on Instagram and have a science channel called Lucinox, so come check us out there too. Sources are listed in the description. Thank you for watching. And by the way, for those of you wondering, the Q&A is still happening. It will likely be the next video I make or the one after that, but it is coming.